Everyone, welcome to this month's webinar for AVERT on emerging global perspectives on preventing and countering violent extremism. I'm Jared DeMella, and I'll be moderating this session today. We'd like to start by paying our respects to the Kaurna people, who are the traditional custodians of the land on which I work here in South Australia. And we pay our respects to elders past, present, emerging, and we welcome all First Nations peoples who may be in attendance today. Today we have three really excellent presentations out of a special issue from Crime and Delinquency, which I will be posting in the chat once our webinar starts. But as our presenters are going through their presentations, just a reminder to all attendees that if you have any questions, please put them in the Q&A function and not the chat. That'll make sure that all of our panelists are able to see them and we can respond. We are going to do the three presentations and then we'll open it up for question and answers and some discussion. I know we always have some great discussions, so I'm looking forward to that. We have three presenters today. Dr. Marketa Kachmanova, sorry if I just mispronounced your name, Dr. Jordan McSweeney, and Dr. Joseph Garcia Cole. So we're going to allow each of our presenters to give us their talk at about 12 minutes, and then we'll have it open for discussion. So with that, Marketa, I'd like to hand it over to you. Thank you so much and welcome. Welcome to the AVERT Symposium, the AVERT webinar.
Thank you very much, Jared. Hello, everyone. And thank you for the opportunity to talk at this AVERT event today. So first, let me share my presentation. Hopefully everyone can see that. So also on behalf of my co-author, Michal Marcol, I'm excited to present our research on community-driven breaks on violent extremism, specifically focusing on the case of Czech Romani minority and why it has not radicalized into domestic violent extremism. This research sheds light on the factors that acted as protective barriers against behavioral radicalization, offering insights that could be valuable for policy making as well as for preventative strategies in the area of PCV. So to give you a bit of the context on the case, the Romani are the largest and the most discriminated European ethnic minority with sizable...
Marketa?
Yes?
Sorry, your slides aren't showing. Could you share your screen?
Yes, I'm hopefully sharing. Okay. Once again.
Sorry, everyone.
I'm sorry.
No.
And now, yes. So sorry.
And then if you could just make it full screen.
Yes, I will.
Perfect. Thank you.
Nothing interesting so far. So, okay, so let's get back to the context. So the Romani are the largest European and ethnic minority with sizable populations, especially in Central and Eastern Europe, the Western Balkans, but also, for example, in Spain. Czechia is home to an estimated 250,000 to 300,000 Romani people who have faced systemic discrimination, economic hardship, and exclusion for centuries. So to understand why the Romani ethnic minority in Czechia has remained resilient against radicalization, we examined three major episodes of political violence affecting the community in the country. These were specifically the anti-Romani riots between 2008 and 2014, the Romani protests against police violence in 2021, and recent violent clashes between some members of the Romani and Ukrainian communities in the country. It must be mentioned that during the riots, only the riots, the Romani were solely the victims targeted by political violence, while in the other two cases, we could observe signs of mobilization into violence that was encouraged, particularly on social media, but luckily didn't develop in full-scale political violence. Our methodology combined two qualitative approaches for the data collection. Within the ethnographic phase, we collected 56 interviews with 20 core informants who directly participated in at least one of the 3 episodes of political violence. And we also conducted participant and non-participant observation. In the ethnographic part of the data collection, we used 49 live-streamed videos and more than 4,000 Facebook posts related to these events. For data analysis, we employed constructivist grounded theory, which combined inductive and deductive approaches to draw insights. So, what are the 3 breaks on domestic violent extremism? Our findings identified 3 key protective factors or breaks that have prevented the Romani minority from radicalizing into violent extremism. These are non-violent networks, ideology, and family attachment. Let's explore each of these in more detail. The first break on violent extremism is the presence of non-violent networks that are linked to the minority. So who plays a role here or played a role within these 3 episodes? These were, for example, local governments, different religious organizations, the police, grassroots NGOs, as well as authority figures within the Romani community. These actors featured as the key factor in de-escalation, as they created trust-based platforms for communication, exchange of mutual feedback, but also as a tool for effective community policing that worked without further stigmatizing the community. At the same time, particularly religious organizations provided spiritual and moral support, helping the community members cope with trauma and victimization, which helped reduce different negative feelings associated with radicalization risk factors, such as uncertainty or a sense of non-belonging. The second protective factor relates to ideology, where we identified 2 aspects. First, it's the character of the ideology. The community have a deeply ingrained belief in nonviolence that is rooted in their historical experiences of oppression, persecution, and discrimination. While violence is seen as counterproductive, ineffective, and especially incompatible with their identity. Secondly, and maybe more importantly, it is the approach to ideology. The way the Romani form their worldview is highly flexible and eclectic. This is evident, for example, in their approach to religion, which is a dominant ideological framework within the community across the whole of Europe. They select such elements of the religious doctrine that fit their individual and cultural needs without having to abandon their identity. For example, they tend to display different religious decorations at home, practice rituals often related to singing, and faith also provides a source of personal comfort rather than being a rigid ideological framework. In other words, the Romani approach to ideology discourages radicalization by promoting cognitive flexibility rather than rigidity, and also non-violence. The third protective factor is family attachment. Family is central to Romani culture. Unlike individualistic societies that emphasize personal achievement and career, Romani communities prioritize collective well-being, belonging to a community, and togetherness instead. There is also a strong emphasis on children's safety and well-being, as children ensure the survival of the community, and obviously involvement in political violence would threaten all these assets. Why does it matter? I had a discussion with a British colleague who pointed out that family is important for everyone. And I counter-argued that for marginalized communities specifically, as our data show, family is often the only asset because they are excluded from realizing their potential in other domains, for example, their careers. So based on these findings, what are the key takeaways for preventing and countering violent extremism? I really think we should recognize more in practice the power of protective factors. In my opinion, and as our data and also the countering efforts I got engaged in the Czech Republic in cooperation with the Ministry of the Interior showed, it's better to work with the strengths communities and individuals possess rather than focusing on risks and threats, which often leads to adopting heavy-handed security measures that can escalate tensions rather than prevent violence. And secondly, there are these ethical aspects related to our research, because there's often hesitation in researching marginalized group due to legitimate ethical concerns. However, these communities seem to demonstrate remarkable resilience, having developed coping mechanisms under the conditions of adversity they have been forced to live under. So the seemingly weak are often stronger than we assume, as their lived experiences have equipped them with tools to resist violent radicalization, as in this case. So to conclude, our research highlights that violent extremism is not just about risk factors, it is also about the protective ones. In case of the Czech Romani minority, nonviolent networks' approach to ideology and strong family attachment played a crucial role in averting behavioral radicalization. Understanding and leveraging these insights can enhance prevention efforts worldwide. So thank you very much for your attention, and I look forward to your questions. And now hopefully I'll manage to stop sharing my presentation successfully.
Thank you, Marketha. We really appreciate your insights. Next, we're going to hand the floor over to Jordan.
Great, thanks, Jared. Now, hopefully, is my screen sharing okay?
Yes, perfect.
Yeah,
thank you.
Not a problem. Yeah, hi, everyone. My name's Jordan McSweeney. I'm a senior research fellow at the Centre for Deliberative Democracy and Global Governance at the University of Canberra in Australia. Thanks, Jared, for putting together the special issue, and also to AVERT for putting this webinar together this morning or this evening, depending where you're joining us from. So the project that I want to talk about today, and that's part of the special issue, is part of a collaboration with colleagues at Centre, Professors John Dryzek and Selene Erjan, and also a colleague at UNSW, Associate Professor Peter Ballant, and was supported by the New South Wales Government. And so our paper in the issue is titled Building Democratic Resilience, Protecting the Public Sphere from Violent Extremism. And in it, we explore how we can address some of the challenges that violent extremism poses to the functioning of the public sphere. And so to unpack and contextualize this concept of democratic resilience we propose, and what it might look like in practice, we conducted interviews with some key public servants and civil society actors involved in developing CVE policies and practice in New South Wales. So, jumped ahead there. So we take as our starting point this idea of democratic resilience. And while resilience is a widely used phrase in much CVE discourse and policy, what resilience is and who is responsible for it still remains somewhat contested. And so here we draw on the theory of deliberative democracy to develop a novel conceptualization of democratic resilience. Deliberative democracy is essentially a normative theory of democratic legitimacy, and it's based on the idea that those affected by a collective decision have the right capacity and opportunity to participate in consequential deliberations in making those decisions, and has a very rich conceptualization of the public sphere or public spheres. And so we conceptualize democratic resilience as the capacity of the public sphere to respond to violent extremist attacks and threats without necessarily losing its democratic capacity, which we understand in deliberative terms, in terms of being reflective, competent, and inclusive public deliberation. So we see the public sphere as a largely overlooked site of contention and harm, but also resilience when dealing with the challenges posed by violent extremism. And we conceptualize the public sphere as, I guess, a communicative space where social and political problems are identified and discussed, where public opinion is formed, and where collective identities are constructed, validated, but also challenged. And a well-functioning public sphere crucially facilitates, the free flow of information. It mediates between the state and society. And it also enables the formation of shared solidarities and connections across difference. And we argue that violent extremist attacks can disrupt these democratic functions by redrawing the cultural, ethnic, and religious boundaries of the public sphere and damaging inclusive notions of collective identity that are quite essential to a multicultural, pluralist democracy like Australia. And so importantly, the effectiveness of violent extremist actions from this perspective and the effects that it has on the public sphere, it doesn't happen in isolation. Rather, it also involves the reaction and interaction of other public sphere actors, such as news media, such as government, but also everyday citizens. And so all of these different actors responding and interacting in the wake of a violent extremist attack or threat is quite crucial, we argue, in either amplifying or containing the effects or the harms of violent extremism in the public sphere. And so in this context, it's really quite critical how democracies respond to extremist threats to determine the success or failure of violent extremism in a given context. So our work in this paper, sorry, I'm not sure why, on my end, it's jumping ahead every time I change a slide. So apologies for that. But our work here focuses primarily on the democratic resilience of the public sphere in reference to far-right and jihadist or neo-jihadist forms of violent extremism. And this is consistent with our case study and the New South Wales CVE agenda at the time of this research. And our empirical insights are based on 14 semi-structured expert interviews with stakeholders working on and around violent extremism in the New South Wales government, in news media, in the community sector, and in academia. And this centered on the views and experiences of these actors, I suppose, regarding the public sphere as a target of violent extremism, the existing sort of CVE initiatives and the state of the CVE agenda in New South Wales, and the broader implications of this agenda for the public sphere. And our interviews are supplemented also by a document analysis of all the publicly available New South Wales government CVE policy documentation as of December 2021. And so this includes program evaluations, parliamentary submissions, and other public-facing government documentation relating to this. So our research on the ways that, violent extremism is tackled in the state of New South Wales enables us to, I guess, show how democratic resilience may look in practice and what institutions and actors are key for establishing and maintaining a reflective, competent, and inclusive public sphere, which is essential to a healthy and functioning democracy, and also the role of these actors in, I guess, building democratic resilience and sustaining it. And so based on our empirical work, we identified 7 critical factors that enable or inhibit democratic resilience in the public sphere that you can see there on the slide. Now, we don't have a heap of time this morning, so for reasons of time, I want to just focus on 3 of those sort of key factors highlighted in bold there. How political leaders talk about violent extremism, how the news media reports on violent extremism, and how government engages with civil society and the public. So the first one, how political leaders talk about violent extremism. The words that political leaders choose can, as one of our interviewees described, quote, give terrorists what they want, or it can deny them what they want. And so you can get a sense of this from some of the quotes also on the slide there. So some of the key things here is, avoiding racialized framings that reduce minoritized identities to essentialized characteristics relating to, say, criminality or extremism or violence. This is quite critical to maintaining an inclusive and competent public sphere. There's also, I guess, as a product of this, and particularly in our discussions with New South Wales government stakeholders, a very strong need across all levels of government for the development and updating of existing strategic communications plans for public communications in the wake of a violent extremist attack or threat. And this is because, as our research demonstrates, the public statements of prominent figures like a state premier, for example, in the response to violent extremism actually sets the tone for future deliberations and policy formation. So the sort of comments made in the first 24 hours, couple of days, will actually have a sort of long-standing impact on how the sort of policy process may occur even years later. And so these responses, we argue, drawing on deliberative theory, should really center inclusive and unifying language, bridging language, while also reiterating the democratic and inclusive ideal character of society, while also, where necessary, using, let's say, the language of criminal justice rather than what has unfortunately been quite common, at least here in Australia, racialized framings that often exacerbate harm. So similarly, the news media as a key pillar of the public sphere has the potential to undermine or enhance democratic resilience. And here we're really thinking, I guess, about primarily the kind of harmful framings of impacted communities and the ways in which these can produce a fracturing of the public sphere through the process of stigmatization by making particular groups feel they are unable to participate safely and fully in public space and civic life. And so, for example, how Australian Muslim communities have been reported on in the aftermath of jihadist or neo-jihadist violent extremism has, according to our interviewees, had quite a significant effect on, to quote, the way Muslims see themselves as belonging to this country. And so the other side of this equation, though, is the way in which media reports on the violent extremists themselves, because there's a very delicate balance between reporting on a matter of very real public interest, while also ensuring that such reporting does not incidentally serve the objectives of violent extremists. And so several of our interviewees that we've spoken to, particularly those working in newsrooms, warned that Australian newsrooms are actually very underprepared and under-resourced to report on violent extremism in a sensitive, harm-minimizing manner, particularly when it comes to the far right. And this presents, we argue, a serious barrier to building a democratically resilient public sphere, because violent extremists, to quote one of our participants, understand what the weakness of the Australian media are and how to use it to their own ends. And so while there's obviously a very strong and good reason for a press free from government intervention or direction, it's also at the same time vital for the health of the public sphere that there's a serious and urgent effort to address, I suppose, poor media practice in this space. And a starting point, we suggest, could be, for example, best practice guidelines, which already exist and are widely adopted in Australian newsrooms and around the world to report on sensitive topics such as suicide. And we argue this can provide a bit of a framework to better manage some harm minimization reporting on violent extremism. Now, lastly, building a cohesive civil society network is really quite central to the New South Wales CVE program. But interviews with civil society actors working in this space at both the state and the national level highlighted several barriers that hinder the formation of this vibrant civil society network that New South Wales CVE is pursuing, and also broader issues of community trust. So in part here, what our interviews highlight is a lack of consequentiality on the government's behalf in its engagement. And what that means is consequentiality is a deliberative concept whereby engagements need to have some kind of impact on outcomes. And this doesn't necessarily mean that every engagement has a concrete policy outcome, but rather it can also include informal effects such as cultural change and the like. But the key thing really is that government needs to demonstrate how civil society input will be valued and then communicate next steps, even where that input isn't necessarily being implemented, and explain the reasons why where possible. But it's also important from a deliberative perspective that these decision makers and empowered elites learn from the lived experiences of diverse communities. And so practices of institutional listening that I guess shift the responsibility from citizens to express their voice onto government to make themselves receptive and responsive is also really important. So just finally, to sum up, our emphasis on the democratic vitality of the public sphere distinguishes our approach in key ways from some of the long-standing treatments of, how to defend democracy against violent extremism, militant, defensive, immunized democracy, for example, which, for all their differences, conceptualize democracy in terms of the state at the core and the public sphere at the periphery. And we, I suppose, flip this in some respect, because here it's not just the state that needs defending from threats originating in the public sphere, but rather the public sphere is actually at the center of democracy, and its fracturing, as sought by violent extremists, is a key intrinsic democratic loss. And so it shouldn't just be seen only in terms of its implications for the state. So on that point, we also see the public sphere as a potential frontline defense against violent extremism. And so on that point, our research shows how democracies can take deliberate steps to build and strengthen the resilience of the public sphere in the face of violent extremism. Now, what we propose in this paper, though, just finish, is not a checklist of required action, but rather it's to present a set of questions that public sphere actors, including government, should be reflecting on and taking into consideration in their CVE efforts. Thanks for the opportunity to be part of the exciting special issue, Jared, and for the session today, and looking forward to the discussion with everyone.
Thanks, Jordan. That was a super interesting presentation. And I would now like to welcome our third presenter, Joseph.
Hello?
Hi.
Oh, I missed you from the got cut. Oh, sorry.
Oh, you're good.
I thought I was yes. So good morning, everyone.
Joseph, your slides aren't showing?
I am showing it.
Perfect.
It is showing now? Yeah.
Yes, thank you.
Okay, perfect. So good morning or good evening, depending on where you are. My name is Josep Garcia. I'm currently a postdoctoral researcher at the Freie Universität Berlin. And the piece of research I'm going to present today is the result of an intervention we carried out in the south of Spain around 3 years ago. This piece was written along with my colleagues Roberto, Mario, and Manuel, but I will present it today on behalf of them. And the idea, I will explain a bit later about the intervention itself, but the idea was to ask this kind of big question: what works better, context-tailored or user-tailored PCV interventions? Okay. So, of course, our starting point is that we think PV, preventing violent extremism, is the way to go. Critical for community safety, much more effective than any kind of reactive policy. And that it's also interesting to start looking into secondary and primary prevention programs. That is, programs that look at vulnerable populations, but also at the general population, okay? According to the literature, scientific literature, and to major legislative bodies, what we see is that in general, the prevalent idea is that we shouldn't follow one size fits all approaches. That is, we can't import programs from one context to another. Okay, we need to adapt interventions to the context. Now, what we are asking here is, okay, but what if even context-based approaches are not enough, and we actually need to adapt programming to individuals? Okay, this is the question we're trying to ask here. Now, in order to understand our intervention, we need to look a little bit at the 3N model, developed by Delinquency and colleagues in several instances in the literature, tested in various environments around the world. The model has three main elements. Needs, which is kind of the ignitatory element, refers to the need for personal significance, the need to matter, to deserve respect, to have recognition by individuals around you, and as I said, it would be the main trigger, okay, for the radicalization process, according to this theory. Networks would be the environments, the social groups that people seek whenever they see their personal significance attacked, or whenever see a threat that it might be attacked, that it might be reduced. Okay, so these networks can increase or prevent the loss of this personal significance. And the narratives will encompass the ideological factor of the model, and normally work as well as providing the elements, the causes that individuals pertaining to this group will fight for, and the sacrifices that they will do for that group. Okay, so these three elements work together. As I said, needs are the initial elements, and then networks and narratives work together in this possible radicalization process. Yeah. Now, the program we developed, as I said, was carried out in the south of Spain, in Andalusia, along with the regional government. And it was basically a group mentoring program. Okay, we involved around 3,000 pupils from 80 primary and secondary schools from vulnerable areas. These are schools that the government designates as or considers to be in especially vulnerable areas concerning socioeconomic indicators. And the objectives for this program were three. First of all, offering alternatives to gain personal significance for this youth. Second, delegitimize violent narratives. And third, weaken the possible violent networks that the youth participating might have, and also create new prosocial networks. Okay. How did we design this program? So there were three main elements working here. The first one was area mentors. That meant actually mentors that were part of the community, former students, former teachers, retired people from town that were known for the community and wanted to participate somehow in the community. And they would come into the classroom, work alongside the teachers, and develop some activities. As you can see in the pictures on the top right, for example, music activities, arts, anything they could do with the students, sometimes guided with the didactic materials that were developed for the program, as I say in the third point, following the active methodologies approach. Aside from this, we also had inspirational mentors, as we defined them, and these were actually people that had reached certain positions in society. Some of them, for example, were famous actors, musicians, also policemen, people that had reached certain positions in society coming from those same environments. Okay, so they were in a way breaking the stereotypes or breaking the the idea that if you come from certain environments, you cannot leave those environments. Okay, so the idea was to inspire the youth, so to give them new role models. Okay, so these were the three main elements: area mentors, inspirational mentors, and then the didactic materials that as I said, were also used as part of group mentoring. What are the objectives of our research in this case? We want to evaluate, one second, because I need to and see here. We want to evaluate the effectiveness of this program from the point of view of the context, okay, that is the school, okay, and then from the point of view of the individual, okay. So there's two kind of levels here, and then we want to see which approach works. Following which approach the project gave better results. Okay, from this perspective, we want to try to analyze if a possible adaptation to the context would be enough, or an adaptation to the individual would be better. Okay, so I want to make clear that we did not adapt the project to individuals, and this is a possible limitation. We are trying to see if this would be a better approach. Yeah, it was adapted to the context because each school chose different mentors and chose different even didactic units to facilitate with the participants. Okay, so the methodology we had in the end 470 pupils. Of course, we needed to clean a lot of data, 10 to 18-year-olds from 27 schools. The design was measured from a pre-test, post-test, before the intervention and after the intervention. And then the measures were actually the three elements in the 3N model, as I said: significance quest, divine networks, and violent narratives. And then we added some socio-demographics: age, gender, school, and implementation time, meaning how long did they actually participate in this project. In order to carry out the analysis, we implemented a multi-level structural equation model with schools as clusters, seeing within schools the individual level, and then between schools at the school level, to see if it would work. Or this adaptation to the school context would also give results. What we, aside from this, also we carried out some ANCOVAs. Well, I won't go into the details on the analysis maybe, but what we saw is actually that significance quest was reduced significantly. In general, that was the only actual variable that showed significant changes from the beginning until the end. And then divine networks and violent narratives did not show any significant changes, although we saw that when there was some interaction with age, gender, and length of the intervention. So being older, male, and participating for longer in this project reduced divine networks and also reduced violent narratives in a more significant way. Okay. Then we carried out the actual multi-level mediation between the difference between post and pre measures for the three variables, and then the model would understand that significance quest would influence divine networks, which would at the same time influence violent narratives. And what we saw is that the between school model was not significant, whereas the within school was significant. So we can, in a way, conclude that user-tailored approach would be more advisable, more effective than context-tailored approach for PVE, at least from following this study. And personal interventions are especially relevant because we can address individual vulnerabilities. Okay, so of course this piece of research has limitations. It was a program with a lot of dropout. We were dealing with difficult teenagers. There was no detailed plan of implementation difference between schools. As I said, we don't know. We know that each school did different things, but we don't know exactly what they did, why it might have worked better, worse. We don't know that. very important limitation as well was the intervention period. Maximum time was 90 days, 3 months. Normally, for mentoring interventions to work, we need at least 9 to 12 months. So it's a piece of research with some limitation, but still it opens some possible future research, and we recommend that it could be better with other similar evaluations of multiple tailored interventions or longer interventions even. In terms of practical recommendations, as I said already, try to prioritize individual customization of PV interventions, individualized mentoring approaches, targeting high-risk demographics. For example, in our case, it would be older adolescents and males. In other cases, it would be different, of course, but this is what we saw. And again, try to look for longer programs. Yeah, this would be everything from my side. I don't know if I think I reached more or less what was expected in terms of time, or maybe I went even too fast. But if there's any questions, I'm here.
Thank you, Joseph. So I think for me, something I really appreciated for all of the panelists is the different countries that each of you were studying and focusing on, but also a lot of the similarities. And definitely the papers talk to one another, which I thought was really interesting. So thank you for that, and thank you for a great presentation. So to all of our attendees, a reminder that you can pop some questions in the chat, excuse me, not the chat, the Q&A, and we'd be happy to answer them. I have it open, and I don't see any written just yet, so I think I'll take the opportunity to ask one of my questions. And so for Jordan, I know that this is like the policy and the framework came out after the paper was published. But I'm interested, could you talk to us a little bit about how the concept of like democratic resilience and like New South Wales efforts sort of connect with this new Australian CVE framework that came out in January?
Jared, I was really hoping you wouldn't ask me that because unfortunately, been in the midst of a big grant writing project, so I haven't actually had a good enough look at the new CVE framework to answer that well, I'm afraid. Sorry, it's sitting in my inbox, just trying to find the time to go over it properly.
Fair, 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 fair. Are there any questions in the Q&A? So we have a question from Rachel who says, I'm interested in the didactic materials used.
I guess it's for me, right?
Yes. Yes, yes.
Yeah. There's actually a guide that was published. It's in Spanish though. So if anyone can read Spanish, I could definitely share it with them if they reach out to me to my email. But it was developed by some pedagogists touching on different. As I said, it's a bit more like the non-formal education aspect. So I think it was one dealt with arts, the other one with entrepreneurship, the other one was about science, and I forgot what the other one was about. Sorry, technology, science and technology, and they were actually activities that could be carried out in the classroom, but of course they did not follow the typical classroom structure or hierarchy. It was a bit different because, of course, the role of the mentor was more about this informal figure that you can learn from without actually being a teacher without being there a hierarchy. So this was the idea. As I said, if anyone is interested, I could definitely share it with them.
Oops. Rachel says, thank you, we can reach out. And then we had a question from Annette about linking the framework. So I did put that in the chat, the URL to the framework there as well. Excellent. Any other questions? So Marketa, I had one for you as well. If you could talk to us a little bit more about the next steps of your work. Are you planning on expanding research with the same community? Are you looking to sort of do a similar study with a different community?
Well, actually, this specific paper was a part of my dissertation research, which is much broader, and there are more resilience factors I identified in general, which were not linked to the particular breaks related to these episodes of political violence. So hopefully I'm going to publish a book soon on that. And maybe I can just briefly mention that the other resilience factors, or the resilience factors I identified as generally present in the community, are strong sense of belonging, conflict avoidance in socio-psychological terms, then organizational ontology. May sound familiar to Joel Busher. And also forgiveness, which is a new variable in the field, in the sense of like coping mechanism, psychological coping mechanism that the community uses when facing grievances and coping with hate, how to process it. And so rather than wanting to take revenge, they try to understand the motivation of the transgressor, and they tend to forgive. So that's an important thing. And then something I call complex flexibility, where there is this approach to ideology that I discussed in this paper with my co-author. So cognitive flexibility and the way the Romani handle emotions, that they are very open. This is something very looks like something which is seemingly unimportant, but I came across a very interesting preventative toolkit by Polish social psychologists at Dutch schools, where they write about the role of being able to work with emotions and vent emotions. So it's sort of like somehow fits in this idea. And also the way the Romani experience time, because they live more in the present moment. And for a lot of negative emotions to mount and for aggression to take root, you need time. And there is a lot of literature on this specific community. It's probably due to their itinerant history, that they have been traveling people, largely due to forced migration, that they really experience time differently. So being able to live in the present moment more also plays a role as a resilience factor. So hope it was clear.
Yes, thank you. We have a question from Isel, but because she's the host, she can't post it in the Q&A section. So I'll just read it out. The question is for Joseph and Marketa, and it says, some PVE practitioners believe that by solely targeting vulnerable communities, you may inadvertently perpetuate hostility and tensions between communities. For example, those that are beneficiaries of these activities or projects, and those that are excluded from these activities. This is something that Isel has often seen in the African context. Is this a risk that you recognized in your studies?
Okay, I will just start or respond to it briefly, Joseph, if you allow. Well, my efforts, hopefully I put it clearly enough, are like for practitioners and researchers alike, being aware of the strengths, the resilience factors that the communities have in case you see worrying signs of radicalization, so that you can work with these, it's not about like targeting prevention to a specific minority group, but being aware of the strengths the community has in case there is a security problem, and then use these strengths to counter the threat or risk situation. So.
Thank you. Joseph?
Yes, definitely. I think it's spot on to bring that up. It's one of the how to say, not limitations, but one of the issues that, okay, let's say we accept what other conclusions kind of led into. Yes, let's adapt every programming to individuals. Yes, but of course, this might end up labeling certain individuals or kind of separating them from the group, which is also an issue, right? So it is very delicate. I think in the case of the program in Andalusia, for example, one of the things that was um, crucial was to never mention certain words or certain terms. So the project was framed as a social inclusion project. It was never mentioned that this had to do with reducing violent attitudes or even less PCV or violent extremism. Nothing about that. It was mostly about social inclusion, which is a term that everyone would kind of accept. Okay, so I think it's spot on to take very much take a lot of care on how you adapt it, how you deal with vulnerable groups or vulnerable individuals, and especially how you frame it.
Excellent. Thank you so much. And I'm not seeing any more questions in the chat or the Q&A. So I just wanted to take one more opportunity to thank our three presenters. I thought this was a really interesting panel. I also just wanted to give a massive shout out for coordinating on times. I know sort of finding that sweet spot of times that work between Europe and Australia can be a bit of a challenge. So thank you so much for making time to share your interesting research with us. For all attendees, just a reminder that the recording of this webinar will be posted to our AVERT channels. So please follow us on YouTube, on LinkedIn, and other social media spaces to see the recording and to stay up to date with all of our future webinars. And Marketa mentioned Professor Joel Busher, and so this is actually a great opportunity to announce that our next webinar will be taking place in April, led by Professor Joel Busher. And the title of that is going to be Pathways Towards and Away from Violence During Waves of Far-Right Protest. Yes, so there will be more information that will be shared via our mailing list and social media platforms. So stay tuned for that. Otherwise, I hope everyone has a wonderful day. And thank you for joining us.
Thank you very much, Jared.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.